Had a very beautiful community. I'm coming through from bed for health reasons, so we'll keep this brief. But I think this also comes with a health warning because I may say some challenging things. Now, Putin's come out a winner, a preliminary winner, because much is still to be settled from the Munich Security Conference. The biggest practical question is whether European shock and enthusiasm for action can be translated into capacity for action, about which a modicum of skepticism is recommended, I'm afraid. But I think there is a deeper way in which Putin may be coming out a winner beyond just particular things said about Russia and Ukraine by the Trump administration, beyond the fact that they're going over the top of Ukraine to negotiate with the Russians, beyond them bypassing the Europeans. Or rather, it's that these details imply a wider pattern that is itself a bigger problem that we need to articulate a little bit, and that's a politics of spheres of influence. So in the early parts of the Trump administration, we heard a lot of talk about Mexico, Canada, Greenland, and the implication of that seemed to be that these people think that America has its own sphere of influence. And the implication of much of what we've heard more recently from the Trump administration, including Rubio talking about multipolarity, implies that they think other powers have a sphere of influence, including Russia. How far is this going to go? How far does this administration think that Russia has a sphere of influence of its own? How far are they going to think that China has a sphere of influence of its own? How far are we going to have a politics that centers not just what was in the news for weeks, America's sphere of influence and Trump's crony imperialism, but how far is it also going to be that there's an idea there of other powers having a sphere of influence? And even if that's already a challenging idea, there is an even more challenging idea against the background of which we have to think about this. And that's the idea that progressive orthodoxies, whether they're about how the international system is arranged, or whether they're about how domestic politics is arranged, are in decline. They're still a hugely central and important voice, but they are one voice among others. They continue to speak as though they're the only voice, and that's part of the problem with the backlash that they're receiving. Because you don't want to pretend you've won arguments you haven't won in politics. But progressive orthodoxy is coming to an end, and it's going to become one voice among others. And it's important to understand that we have to be clear about the different things taking its place. So when we look at the Trump administration, it's not just sort of crony crudity and entrepreneurialism and self-serving dilution of counter-majoritarian institutions. That's there too, and you have to challenge it. But you also have to watch out for ideology. Now, ideology and Trump don't sit together well because with his narcissism and his neurodiversity, he is not a man who, and the interaction between the two, he's not a man who tends to have many beliefs. He has dispositional states. And funnily enough, dispositional states, like his dispositional attitude to tariffs, can be more vulnerable to ideological capture than more well thought out beliefs that you're ready to defend systematically. And then, of course, it's not just Trump. There are other people in the Trump administration who have ideological visions. Musk is one of them. He thinks he's at a certain kind of vanguard of the future of capitalism with his views on AI, free markets, and space. So, the kind of ideology that most of you are fairly sympathetic to is becoming one voice among others. And what's coming to take some of the space that used to occupy is actually a combination of entrepreneurial repulsiveness, but also ideological challenge of various sorts. And, we tend to think that when ideological challenge comes, it's going to be coherent and then we'll recognize it. But some ideological challenges come as a kind of an ideological porridge, which doesn't make it any less ideological. And that's the background against which we should see some idea of a politics of spheres of influence potentially developing. And of course, a litmus test for it in the coming weeks is going to be how far are they going to be prepared to give to Mr. Putin. This was almost undigestible, but I'm grateful for your attempt to digest it. Lots of love.